Hey lads, welcome to a very quick tutorial for the Primordial Wave Cleave build for Restoration Shamans. It is still very early in the patch, DPS is not an issue, and what we should be focusing on is keeping the group alive and healing as much as possible. So I decided to try out this build, which was by the way suggested by one of you YouTube viewers, T-Bone. Thank you very much for that suggestion. So let me first show you the changes that we're going to be making to the talent tree, and then I'm going to talk about the pros and the cons for this build. We are of course taking Primordial Wave, which we should by the way have anyway, unless you really don't like the spell and you're running something else instead. And then we're putting 2 points into the talent below that, which improves the Primordial Wave and makes it so the next healing wave we cast hits for 25% more value. After that, we put 1 more point below that, which basically has 2 options. One of them is RNG, which could reset the cooldown of your Primordial Wave. Instead, we're going to go into the continuous waves, which reduces the cooldown of Primordial Wave by 15 seconds. Now, those 3 extra points were actually taken from the Stormkeeper and the Mana Tide Totem talents, assuming of course that we are not running Downpour and we are not running the Ancestral Awakening talents. Alright, this is the build we're going to go with. Now I'm going to talk about the pros and the cons of this build, and then I'll show you some statistics from some of the dungeons that I run with this specific spec. Starting with the positives, there's much less buttons to press. There is no Downpour, there's no Mana Tide, there's no Stormkeeper. So from that perspective, the gameplay is a little bit easier. And if you're thinking, oh no, Mana Tide, we're going to have so much mana trouble and mana issues, do not worry about that either, because this spec is actually very mana efficient. What you're actually focusing on is spreading Riptides, which is the most mana efficient spell in the game, and then you follow them up with a Healing Wave, which cleaves to all the targets that have the Riptide, and Healing Wave also happens to be your mana efficient spell compared to Healing Surge. Because of that last talent that we took, the continuous waves, you're actually having this up all the time, 2 or 3 times per each trash pool depending on the sites, and multiple times during boss fights. This spec is also going to make you heal more compared to DPS, first because you don't have Stormkeeper anymore to distract you, and then if you have any tier pieces, you would be actually wanting to cast Healing Rain a lot more to get the benefit from both the 2-piece and the 4-set piece bonus. Speaking of that, of course your tier set piece bonus relies on having more Riptides out to get more value out of it, and although that's not huge in N+, Primordial Wave actually gives you an extra Riptide, which also synergizes well with your chain heals, and particularly the flow of the Tide's talents, which consumes the Riptide on the target but makes your chain heal do more healing. Of course, it's worth noting here that also that diminishes the value of the Primordial Wave, because the Primordial Wave relies on having more Riptides out and the chain heal actually consumes those. So from that point of view, I think it's fair to put that as a negative as well. It brings some value, but it also takes some value away, so it's basically a trade-off and a two-edged knife. The other big minus of the setup is that it's very long and very slow. It doesn't come down just to the fact, okay, I have the button and I press it. You actually have to spread the Riptides before that, then press the button, and then you have another slow long cast in the form of Healing Wave. In other words, this is not a button that you press to save the group from wiping, it's not Ascendance, it's not Spirit Link. Yes, you're going to have that much more often, but it requires much more skill, much more setup, and much more planning to execute it correctly. And of course we have to mention the big elephant in the room, you're going to be doing much less DPS, not only because you're focusing more on healing, but also because you're losing Stormkeeper. In the few runs that I did with this build, I was actually doing anything between 5 to 10k less DPS, going down to about 20k DPS per the usual 25-30k DPS that I do otherwise, with the current gear and the playstyle that I have. As I mentioned earlier, that's not an issue right now, but if you start pushing higher keys, or you fancy a run where you actually pump up a little bit of DPS when you can, this is not the build that's going to suit your playstyle. It is also worth mentioning that you're also going to be using some bigger healing cooldowns when you go with this build. Putting Downpour aside, which you might not be running anyway, Mana Tide not only gives you mana back, but the Spiritswalker Tidal Totem talent turns it into a pretty good healing cooldown, which reduces the cast time of your chain heals. And that is a cooldown and a button that you can press and start spamming the chain heals to get out of a tough situation that doesn't require the long and hard setup that Primordial Wave has. And although you can consider Stormkeeper to be a DPS cooldown, it could actually be a pretty good healing cooldown if you combine it with Ancestral Guidance. one of my favorite combos is when I know that there's a hard trash pack coming, I just pop my Stormkeeper, and when the damage comes, I press Ancestral Guidance, I send out the 2 instant chain lightnings, and that guarantees that your group is going to be topped off immediately. So, what's the final verdict? Well, I think the short answer is you just have to try it and decide for yourself. This pack actually changes the playstyle, so I like the fact that you have to focus more on healing and keeping your teammates alive, although that's of course at the cost of some CDs and DPS. But at the same time, in some hierarchies and some tougher situations, you just end up spamming chain heal, and this is just a button that you don't feel like pressing because you already consumed all of your Riptides with the chain heals, and now it's just diminished value. So instead of pressing the button, you have to start all over again, do the setup, cast the Riptides, etc. At the end of the day, let me show you some data as well. I did 3 runs, Vortex Pinnacle 18 and 19, and then Brackenhide Hollow 21. It's a pretty small dataset, but as you can see on the left hand side, I have the healing meters for Vortex Pinnacle 18, and there the group was actually pretty good. They did mechanics correctly, they didn't take a lot of damage, so I was basically able to keep up everybody alive just by the Riptides and the Primordial Waves cleaving with the healing wave. That actually felt pretty nice, but it was a chill group, it was an easy run, and there was not much of a challenge in that dungeon. However, as the key level went up and the dungeons became harder, also much longer, the Brackenhide Hollow was actually over 35 minutes, the Primordial Wave Cleave did not feel that great and that good anymore. It still brought a lot of value, there were some situations where it was very good, and one thing I noticed is that although things felt a little bit harder, I never had mana issues. But at the same time, there were long periods of time where I didn't get much value of the Primordial Wave, and also some of the longer boss fights, I felt like if I had that extra button from the Manatite Totem cooldown, or even the Stormkeeper for the last boss in Brackenhide to kill the Totem faster, things could have gone much smoother. So based on that, is that a spec that I'm going to play all the time in all the keys? Well, definitely not, but I would highly recommend for you at least to test it so you get a feel of it and see for yourself if you like it or not. I'll definitely give it a shot in at least few more keys, and if you want to see some footage, I'll probably upload the Vortex Pinnacle 19 run on my YouTube channel. The Brackenhide one we did in time, but I'll try to do a redo and give you some footage of that as well. If you want to try it out and import that build straight into your game, check the description of this video, it's linked there, and keep in mind that I do have hacks in this build just because it's Incorporeal week. If you do end up testing it, do let me know what you think about it in the comments below and share your thoughts and insights. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, good luck in your keys.